Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 4, I and Talon, by K.W. Jeter. Chapter 15. Cold, thought Iris, and timeless. For a moment, and a seeming eternity, she felt the way she had at the movie theater in L.A., when she and Vogel had ingested the Thermatos. World without end, but no amen. Both clock and time and her own pulse had come to a halt, frozen in place, while waiting for a signal from somewhere in what was left of that other world, the one outside her skin. She felt the signal, another's pulse, and it took all her self-control to keep herself from dropping the cold wrist she held, and snatching her hand back to herself as though the icy flesh had suddenly flared with heat. For a few moments longer, Iris kept her fingertips poised against the blue vein threading snake-like among the tendons that disappeared under the sleeve of the jacket in which the late Dr. Eldon Tyrell had been dressed. Or not so late, she corrected herself. Once again, the slow, fragile pulse made itself known. "That's a good one," said Iris. "Real good one." Still holding the body's wrist, she glared across the coffin, its glass lid thrown back. Her slitted gaze narrowed even further as she regarded Karsten. "You must live for little jokes like this one. What kind of reaction were you hoping to get from me? What kind of reaction were you hoping to get from me? Screams or a dead faint?" She shook her head in disgust. "Sorry, I can't oblige. I'm too stiff right now to collapse." "Your reaction was pretty much what I expected." Karsten's attitude of mild amusement hadn't ebbed. "You're a professional, after all, in many ways. In the line of work to which you're accustomed, the difference between the living and the dead is merely a matter of what stage of the process you're in." She ignored the comment. "So what is this supposed to be? A practical joke or something?" She gestured with the dead man's hand. "What did you do? Wire him up with a subcutaneous pump?" "There's a lot that can be done with hydraulics, or at least until the batteries run down." "You know, it's not a joke." Karsten took the late doctor's hand from her, as though Tyrell were a dance partner being turned over to the next in line. "If it were a joke, I don't think you would have gotten quite so angry. Really, it's written right there in your face. You look as though you'd like to kill me." "That's accurate." "But you're not going to," said Karsten. "That's what I mean by professionalism. There are still questions to be answered, and you figure I can tell you what you want to know." His childlike shoulders lifted in a shrug. "So ask away." "All right, I'll do that." Her voice got louder and harder, bouncing off the ice that coated the chamber's walls. "What's the deal here? Eldon Tyrell is dead. I saw him get killed in that stupid movie Vogel showed me. Which is why the Tyrell Corporation is ganz kaputt. Or at least the reason why it's not put back together the way it used to be. And put back together is what Tyrell himself would have to be. If you want me to believe that somehow you've got him here and he's got his ticker going, only turned down low. What I saw the batty replicant do to him in that movie was like an egg getting crushed. Skull-wise. The prognosis was not good for the poor bastard.
No, it wasn't.
Unperturbed, Karsten leaned down and fussily restored the hand and forearm to where it had been lying folded on top of the other, across the body's chest.
If you thought the number you saw the Batty replicant perform on Eldon Tyrell was a fatal one, you'd be absolutely right.
So what's the deal? Inside her head, she tried to pick apart the old man's words, trying to find a cure in their tangled connections. Are you trying to tell me the movie I watched, that Blade Runner thing, was a fake? And what I saw happen to Tyrell, that didn't happen to him?
Oh, it happened to him, certainly enough. Eldon Tyrell had accumulated enough, shall we say, bad karma in his lifetime that such a fate was inevitable for him. In many ways, it could be postulated that he had done his own part to bring about exactly the death he had wished for himself. In the machinery of the universe, a guilty conscience is one of the teeth on the gears that mesh with such flesh-rending precision. When the Batty replicant's hands closed around Eldon Tyrell's skull, just as you saw in the movie, the result was rather like Humpty Dumpty in the old children's rhyme.
I take it you mean that was an egg which was not going to get put back together anytime soon?
Not with all the duct tape in the world.
Karsten exuded a grim satisfaction.
The Batty replicant should be admired for its thoroughness. That was a good kill, if a messy one.
So then, like I said before, this has to be some kind of a fake. Arms wrapped around herself once again, Iris nodded toward the unmoving figure in the glass-lidded coffin. And frankly, I don't get the point of it. If that's not Dr. Eldon Tyrell in there, what is it?
Oh, it's Tyrell, all right. Karsten nodded slowly. But not the one you saw in the Blade Runner movie. Not the one that got killed by the Batty replicant. Let's just say it's a different Eldon Tyrell.
I think, said Iris after a moment, I know where this is going. And I don't really like it. And I don't like it. Not one bit.
Really?
The attitude of mild amusement returned to Karsten.
Why should it bother you to consider that this, he pointed to the body in the coffin, might in fact be a replicant, an Eldon Tyrell replicant to be exact?
It complicates things, Iris spoke with barely contained fury. And things are complicated enough already. I don't need this.
Why should it be such a problem for you?
Karsten's words gently but relentlessly needled at her.
I thought you Blade Runners were supposed to be the experts at telling the real from the fake. Human beings from replicants.
Don't start with me about that. Iris turned the flat of her hand toward him. It doesn't matter whether cops like me can tell humans from replicants or not, but if Tyrell was having his labs make a replicant using himself as the templant, the master that the copy would be based on, then it takes everything up another notch, headache-wise. Her own head actually was beginning to throb, as though by some sympathetic magic. It felt the trauma the late Eldon Tyrells had undergone. Why would he have even wanted to do something like that?
A good question, Karsten said. You're getting better and better at this game, but you're slightly off regarding the details. It's not replicant in the singular. We're talking about more than one.
Okay, That does it." Iris turned and took a step back the way she and the old man had come, past the shelves of silently staring eyes and toward the door. "I don't care about any answers. I'm not hanging around for this."
"Yes, you are."
Surprisingly strong, Karsten grabbed her by one arm, stopping and pulling her around to face him.
"If you don't want to know things like this, you shouldn't have started asking questions. Going right back to the beginning, when you were trying to find a certain lost owl, and you didn't have any idea where it was going to lead to."
He let go of her and stepped back beside the glass-lidded coffin.
"If this is where the trail winds up, you're going to have to face it, no matter what it means. That's what a real cop would do, at any rate."
The old man's words stung her. Inside her jacket, the gun the guard had returned to her had chilled into a small sculpture of black ice, the one that could both silence the old man and still the slow pulse ticking through the veins of the coffin's occupant, once and for all. "You're taking an awful big risk," she thought as she glared at him.
"You see,"
continued Karsten, elaborately helpful,
"in some ways it should have been obvious to you."
He gestured at the other coffins, lined up on their short trestle supports.
"I thought that, given the business you were in, you would know more than you apparently do about the exact mechanics of the replicant industry. What I suppose looks to you like funeral caskets, standard cemetery furniture, are in fact shipping containers, though of course not of any ordinary kind or function. They're what had been used when the UN immigration program had been in full swing for transporting the products of the Tyrell Corporation, the completed replicants, to the problem with canned meat, you might say. Any time you're shipping perishables, you're faced with a spoilage problem. And since the Tyrell Corporation's replicants have only a 4-year life expectancy, your customers aren't going to be too happy if you use up a good percentage of that shelf life getting the products out to the colonies. Even with the UN transport ships' enhanced light speed capabilities, by the time the Tyrell Corporation would have warehoused the replicants here on Earth, shipped them out to a central distribution point, then from there to the separate colonies, and finally into the hands of their new owners, there would have been at the most a few months left of the replicants' lifespans. Hardly an economic proposition, even for an entity with the resources of the UN immigration program. Thus, the need for shipping devices such as this.
Karsten reached down and touched a control pad near the latch of the open coffin. A string of red digits lit up on a small black readout panel. As Iris watched, the last digit in the sequence changed from a 7 to a 6 in a glacial countdown process.
"As I said," continued Karsten, "without something like this, the Tyrell Corporation's merchandise would have been just about dead by the time it reached its ultimate destinations. Using suspended animation technology to slow down the replicants' life processes en route resulted in a loss of a couple of months at most, still significant, which is why the Tyrell Corporation's manufacturing practice was to stuff the replicants into these boxes as soon as they came off the assembly line and before they were shipped off planet, to absolutely minimize such losses in usefulness. The UN immigration program wouldn't have gone on playing the Tyrell Corporation and allowing it to maintain its monopoly on the replicant technology if it hadn't.
So what? Whatever other emotions Iris might have felt were now swept aside by her exasperation. Why should I be concerned about how the Tyrell Corporation shipped its goods? What's it got to do with me?
Perhaps more than you realize, said Karsten mildly. With you and all the other Blade Runners, none of you ever stopped to think about the time-based logistics of the so-called escaped replicants you were supposed to hunt down and retire. Most of them were at the ends of their 4-year lifespans when they showed up back here on Earth, as you saw in the Blade Runner movie you watched. The Batty replicant and its group returned to LA specifically in an attempt to shake some sort of hoped-for extension of their lives from their creator, which of course Eldon Tyrell was unable to grant them.
So? Iris managed a near-frozen shrug. The replicants were out there in the far colonies doing whatever crappy jobs they were given for close to 4 years. Then some of them escaped and came back here. Big deal. Like you said, they could be in the colonies for that long since they were basically on ice when they were shipped out there.
Ah. But the suspended animation containers, like the ones here, were supposedly only used on the journey out to the colonies. But what about the journey back here to Earth? How did any of the escaped replicants manage that without coming to the ends of their allotted lifespans and dying en route? If they had already used up most of their 4 years off-planet.
How the hell should I know?
Exactly, said Karsten. You don't know. It's a mystery. If you stop to think about it, for any of the Batty group, for example, to have made their way back to Los Angeles and the Tyrell Corporation headquarters, they would have needed access to suspended animation containers such as these, identical to the ones in which they were shipped out to the colonies. Otherwise, they would have expired by reaching the ends of their programmed lifespans before they ever got here.
Okay, she mulled it over for a few seconds. Maybe they did have access to these things. They killed the crew and took over some ship, didn't they? That was what was said in the movie, about Batty and his group. So it was a UN emigration program freight ship returning a load of these empty containers to the Tyrell Corporation. The Batty rep and his bunch put themselves into suspended animation inside the containers and sent the ship on an autopilot program to Earth. That way, they still had whatever was left of their original lifespans to try shaking down Dr. Tyrell for the extension they wanted, but didn't get.
A nice theory, but impossible in practice. Even if they manage to pull that off on their own, these containers can't be sealed and their animation suspending processes initiated from inside them. And the UN ships can't be brought into Earth orbit on autopilot. Any escaped replicants would still need the assistance of other parties to be brought out of the suspended animation state.
Karsten pointed his thumb toward the coffin-like devices.
These things don't have alarm clocks built into them. Once you're in, you need somebody else to wake you up.
Fine. Then they had accomplices or something. Maybe the rep simps did it for them. Iris had never had any run-ins with organized groups of human replicant sympathizers. They had apparently faded away in the couple of years she had been with the police department. But she supposed they might still be active. Giving a bunch of escaped replicants the chance to mess with Eldon Tyrell and the whole Tyrell Corporation? That's exactly the sort of thing that some underground rep simp cell would get a kick out of pulling off.
It's much more complicated than that, said Karsten. The operation of these suspended animation shipping containers is a highly technical affair. They were developed solely for the use of the replicant industry, and there's no expertise from other areas that can be applied to them. In fact, the members of our committee who keep these up and running are former Tyrell Corporation employees on whom we had to expend considerable resources in recruiting and then extracting from their positions with that company. For the Rep Sims to have aided the kind of conspiracy you imagine for the purpose of aiding escaped replicants in their attempts to reach Earth, they would have to have recruited and kept in place similar highly trained operatives. And not just here at the escaped replicants' destination, but at the outer colonies as well, so the replicants could be both placed into the suspended animation state as well as taken out of it. For such parties to have been Rep Simps, as you theorized, would mean the Rep Simp underground and its activities had spread all the way to the far colonies. Not very likely, given that the only human beings out there are either UN immigration program personnel or the immigrants themselves, all of whom had been carefully screened to eliminate anyone with Rep Simp tendencies. Okay, then who the hell did help the escaped replicants get here to Earth alive and kicking?
I don't know. The smug attitude had evaporated from Karsten's wrinkled face. I wish I did. It's something our little committee is working on, trying to determine exactly that. But our resources are limited, and we have other things that take up the lion's share of our attention. The only thing of which we feel reasonably sure, and it's a matter of logic more than hard evidence, is that whoever was behind the traveling assistance provided to the escaped replicants, it must have been some entity with connections going right to the top, either in the Tyrell Corporation itself or the UN Emigration Program.
Yeah, right, said Iris sourly. Like Eldon Tyrell would finance an operation that was not only going to make his company look bad, dangerous escaped replicants running around in the streets of LA, but would ultimately get him killed? How likely is that?
Eldon Tyrell was a complicated man.
A silver of Karsten's humorless smile returned.
And as I indicated before, one carrying a large karmic debt, or bad conscience. To use a more old-fashioned term, he was capable of anything.
Like having replicants made for himself? Though her breath was still a white plume from her nostrils, her rising anger managed to generate something like heat inside her gut. Why would he do that? Replicants were supposedly manufactured in order to provide slave labor for the colonists out there. If I were one of them and I got stuck with a rep as ugly and scrawny as some Eldon Tyrell model, I'd demand a refund.
That's hardly why he did it.
Karsten shook his head, gazing down the line of unopened coffins.
His reasons were more complex than that. He wanted more than to be the temp plant for some production line of replicants to be shipped off to the colonies. He might have had a considerable ego, but not one that would have considered his physical form worth duplicating.
Then why? Something in the way the old man spoke had chilled Iris, far beyond a matter of her blood growing thick and heavy in her veins. His voice had gone so soft and quiet, as if he had begun to whisper of secrets, that even the replicant sleeping its long, slow hours and years inside the glass-lidded coffin, dreamless behind the withered face of Eldon Tyrell,
was afraid to hear aloud. "What's the deal then?" She peered closer at the figure standing on the other side of the coffin. "Or is it that something else you and your committee don't know?"
"We know plenty."
Her words appeared to have needled a flash of anger out of Karsten. His pale eyes looked like ice chips as he regarded her.
"It's your ignorance that we need to remedy."
"So what is it that I don't know? Either tell me or let me go out and play in the sunshine." Iris visibly shivered. "I can't even feel my feet anymore."
"It's not what you don't know, it's what you think you know, and that you're completely wrong about."
"Sure." Iris stamped one soiled foot in a vain attempt to get its circulation going again. "You already ran that number past me. All that business about the Void Conf machine being a fake, the Blade Runners actually retiring real human beings instead of the replicants we thought we were putting away. Whatever." She shook her head. "Maybe everything you said is true. I don't know. I don't even know if it matters to me anymore. That was another world." She spoke the realization aloud before she knew herself what it meant. "I used to live in it. I used to have my job there, and I loved that job, but I don't have any of that now. I don't live in that world anymore. So if you want to go ahead and tell me that everything I knew about that world was a lie, go ahead. Why should it matter to me now?"
"Because now," said Karsten, "you're lying to yourself. If it didn't matter to you, you wouldn't have followed the traces to the ruins of the Tyrell Corporation headquarters. You could easily have died there, so you must have wanted something from that rather arduous process you put yourself through."
"No kidding. I wanted my old job back. I thought maybe I could get it if I found the owl I had been assigned to locate in the first place."
"And you stuck around there, watching old movies with your friend Vogel, long after it was apparent that the owl in question was hardly to be found in a place like that, or even any further clues as to its whereabouts. But you stuck around because Vogel had other things to tell you and to show you, things you apparently wanted to know."
Karsten raised one of his snow-white eyebrows.
"So it seems you weren't searching for the owl at all, perhaps not even from the beginning of your quest, whether you knew it or not, or were prepared to even admit it to yourself. You were searching for the truth, and now you have to face the possibility that you're about to find it."
"Because you're going to tell it to me, I suppose?" The old man nodded.
"That's what you're here for."
"All right," said Iris. "Tell you what." She reached inside her jacket, her hand forcing its way past the leatherite stiffened by the chamber's cold. The gun was colder than her fingers. The nearness of the metal to what was left of her heart had done nothing to keep it warm. She drew the gun out, raised it, and sighted directly along its black barrel toward a point between Karsten's pale eyes. "You say you've still got some big secrets left to lay on me? That you know what it is I've supposedly been looking for? The real truth, and all that other bullshit?" Iris curled one forefinger around the gun's trigger. "I'm going to give you a chance to prove it."
"Really?"
The sight of the gun aimed and rock steady didn't appear to alarm Karsten.
"And what's that?"
Iris shifted the gun a few millimeters and squeezed the trigger. The flash from the muzzle lit up the chamber as though a streak of lightning from one of the thunderstorms preceding LA's monsoon season had transferred inside the ice-covered walls. At one side of Karsten's head, The wispy white hair fluttered as the bullet passed just above the top ridge of his ear. The echo of the shot had slammed against the limits of the chamber hard enough to temporarily deafen her. As her hearing cleared once more, Iris could hear the minute, bell-like, tinkling sounds of ice crystals dislodged by the shockwave, drifting like bright stars and diamonds from the ceiling and settling across the grim face of Eldon Tyrell and the glass lids of the other coffins, as though the chamber held a depiction of a winter's mass funeral from a child's illustrated storybook. The thickly vicious liquid in the various glass beakers and jars had shivered with the impact, their contents disturbed enough to slowly turn aside, as though the bodiless eyes had been aroused by events and had brought their silent gaze around to watch.
Maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
Karsten reached up and touched the side of his head, then checked his fingertips to see if there was any blood on them.
To have given that weapon back to you, your emotional state is obviously a little shaky.
Too late now. Iris raised her voice against the shrill whistle of escaping refrigerant. The shot had penetrated one of the larger pipes at the far end of the chamber, releasing a gray jet of condenser gas. But don't worry, it's not a hormonal thing. I've got a proposition to make you.
I'm listening.
Here's the deal. Iris kept the gun dead level between herself and the old man. Whatever revelations you've got lined up, they better absolutely blow me away, so to speak, or I blow you away.
But I was going to tell you everything anyway.
Now you'll really be motivated to make it good. Karsten considered for a moment, then nodded.
It's worth a shot, he said, so to speak.
Exactly. Iris raised the gun a little higher. Her arm felt both weightlessly numb and solid as a carved extension of ice. So go for it.
The truth, the real truth, as you spoke of. Here it is, then.
Karsten took a step backward, spreading his arms wide to indicate not only the row of glass-lidded coffins, but the ice-bound chamber itself.
Everything you see here, everything you thought you knew about replicants, it's all wrong. You don't even know the real purpose of replicants, why they were created, what they're made of. You just don't know.
So tell me then. Iris was beyond impatience. What's the purpose of replicants?
Batty knew, said Karsten. When that group of escaped replicants went to Los Angeles to confront Tyrell, they knew. Somehow they had found out the secret about themselves, about all replicants. So you tell me something. You saw the Blade Runner movie. What did the Batty replicant and his band go to LA for? What did they want from Tyrell?
Life, or more life. The gun didn't move. What else would they want? When you're at the end of a 4-year lifespan, getting a postponement on your death is pretty much going to be your number one priority.
And why would they go to Eldon Tyrell to ask for that kind of extension? It would seem a pointless quest to ask that from the very same creator who had dictated the moment of your death to begin with.
Karsten folded his arms across his chest.
If Eldon Tyrell had decided upon what was to be the pitifully short length of their existences, why would the Batty replicant or any of the others have thought they could change his mind about that?
Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just hoped they could get something out of him, a reprieve. They would be equally dead if they hadn't gone to LA and confronted their maker. The odds didn't matter. They didn't have anywhere else to turn. which raises the question about why they would have thought it was even possible for them to be given longer lives, to have their own deaths pushed a little farther away. When you watched the movie, when you saw what actually happened between the Batty Replicant and his creator, Eldon Tyrell, didn't it strike you as odd how quickly Batty folded? What do you mean? Batty was a determined individual. He was designed to be. The original Roy Batty, the human being who was the template upon which the replicant Batty was based, had been a real piece of work. I know that for a fact. I knew the man. If the replicant Batty had possessed even half the human Batty's ruthlessness, he wouldn't have simply accepted Eldon Tyrell's quick explanations, one techno-buzzword after another, about why it was impossible to extend the escaped replicants' 4-year lifespans. But since the Batty replicant was in fact a true duplication of its original's nature, the fact that he seemingly accepted getting brushed off by Tyrell indicates that possibly something else was going on, that whatever else the other escaped replicants in the group might have been led by the Batty replicant to believe, he at least had some other agenda. If he did, then why? If he did, then he wasn't any smarter than the rest of them. If somebody is coming to the end of his 4-year lifespan, what could be more important than trying to get some kind of extension? That depends, said Karsten simply, upon the nature of the replicant. That is, the nature of the human template that the replicant was duplicated from. And as I said, the original human Batty was not an easygoing kind of person. In fact, he could be downright vicious. That's why he was considered so valuable at what he did, and why the Tyrell Corporation used him as the template for a production run of military aggressor model replicants. Basically, the original human Roy Batty felt deep within what passed for his soul that whatever problems he was confronted with, the best solution consisted of killing somebody else. Charming. You should talk. Karsten's pale eyes gave her a wry glance, above the barrel of the gun leveled in his direction. You never made your living any other way than that. The only difference between you and the original Roy Batty, the human one, is that you and he have had different problems. You thought all you had to do in this world was retire a few escaped replicants, and the original Batty never had any problem with killing humans as well. Perhaps he even preferred it. At least you haven't gotten around to that stage yet. Though in some other important ways, you and the original Batty were even more alike than you might think. Really? Her hand in the raised gun had frozen into one solid construct. And how's that? Neither one of you knew what was really going on, what you were really doing as you went about your deadly jobs. You didn't have the slightest idea, didn't even care, probably, about what the real purpose of the replicant technology was. The Roy Batty replicant knew. Somehow he had discovered the truth, out there somewhere in the far colonies, among the stars. Maybe he was told the truth by whatever parties they were who helped him and the other escaped replicants reach Earth. Maybe those other individuals, humans or other entities, who knows? And organizations had their own agenda about why they wanted murderous replicants such as Batty to return to the Los Angeles where they had first been created. But the suspicions remained, and the facts behind them, that the Batty replicant wasn't in any way interested in groveling to his creator, pleading for a few more days of life. Whatever he did along those lines might have been nothing more than an act, a subterfuge that pulled along with him the other escaped replicants, whose help he needed. Plus,
fooling Eldon Tyrell himself. Tyrell's personal quarters at the Tyrell Corporation building were laced with security and alarm systems. With the number of enemies he had made in his lifetime, he would have been an idiot not to have had them, right?
I suppose so. Iris gave a stiff nod. Rich people in general tend to be on the paranoid side, especially when they live in the middle of a hole like LA. Everybody wants a piece of them, and they've all got knives.
Exactly. Yet Tyrell didn't trigger any of those security alarms when he was confronted with an intruder like the Batty Replicant, even though he knew from the design parameters for one of his company's own products that Batty wasn't likely to have been there on a social call. Things could get really ugly really fast when either a human or a replicant Batty was around. So to keep Tyrell from calling for security, whole divisions of which were available right there in the building, the Batty Replicant would have needed a cover story, some explanation for why he had come there that would distract Tyrell from the actual purpose of Batty's visit. That's what the business of wanting more life, an extension to his paltry allotted span of 4 years, was about. The Batty Replicant knew all along there was no way he or the other escaped replicants could get that from their creator. He'd always known that. Useless to ask, but useful, as I said, for a cover story. Something to divert Eldon Tyrell from the real reason the Batty Replicant was there. And it worked. A thin smile showed on Karsten's face. As you saw in the Blade Runner movie, it worked long enough for the Batty Replicant to take care of the business he had come there for. You're saying, said Iris slowly, that the Batty Replicant went to the Tyrell Corporation headquarters just to kill Eldon Tyrell? Does that surprise you? Not much. Iris still kept the gun leveled at the old man's forehead. I suppose it was a matter of who got first crack at him. Eventually, somebody had to. Both her arms and the gun felt weightless. She held them in place without effort. But what would the Batty Replicant have gotten out of it? The same thing anybody would have gotten if they had been cheated of all but 4 short years of existence, lied to and sold as slave labor to the humans in the far colonies. The same thing you would have wanted if it had been you that had made your way to your creator's private quarters. What else but revenge? She had to admit the old man was right. That was exactly what she would have wanted. If I'm going, she addressed an invisible Eldon Tyrell inside her head, as though she had inserted herself into the movie she had watched in the ruins. Then you're going with me. She was so angry about merely losing the part of her life, her job as a Blade Runner had been, that the frozen gun in her hand seemed to thaw a little bit from the heat of her brooding. But at least she'd had the life. Batty and the other replicants had been cheated out of even that much. But he got his revenge, said Iris aloud. He did kill Tyrell. The images from the movie of the Batty Replicant
crushing Tyrell's skull between his hands like a withered egg, were still bright red in her memory. He got what he wanted.
And he came a long way for it.
On the other side of the gun, Karsten nodded in agreement.
Risking what little bit of his life was still left to him. When you only have 4 years in total, and you're aware of that, then any single day is infinitely precious. Whereas real human beings who don't know when they are scheduled to die think therefore that they are immortal. We can waste all the days we care to, an unlimited supply. But replicants know better. In that way, the old Tyrell Corporation motto is true. More human than human. They are better than us.
Iris was unimpressed. But not so much better, she pointed out, that someone like me wasn't able to settle their hash for them.
True.
Karsten's thin smile appeared on the other side of the gun.
But that might mean something slightly different from what you think it does. But never mind that for the moment. One secret at a time. We were talking about what it is that the replicants knew, which was so important that their leader Batty would risk the few remaining days of his oh-so-short life to make sure their creator Tyrell wouldn't have any more of his. After all, when the Batty replicant and his followers climbed into the suspended animation shipping containers,
Karsten gestured toward the row of glass-lidded boxes between himself and Iris.
They had no way of being sure they would climb out of them when they reached their destination. If they did, they could just as well have been lying down in their real coffins, the ones nobody ever exits, or at least not alive.
Maybe their souls would have climbed out, said Iris sourly, assuming they had any.
Assuming that anybody does. We're talking about Los Angeles here. If such things existed, they'd be for sale somewhere. But the secret, the truth, the escaped replicants knew that somebody either told them or they had found out on their own made such things as souls unnecessary. Or at least unnecessary as far as actual life is concerned.
Karsten's reedy voice grew subtly louder and more emphatic. His pale eyes brightened with a feverish spark.
Because, in a way, the Blade Runner movie you watched with Vogel was right. Eldon Tyrell did have the ability to stave off death, to grant more life, even immortality. But not to his own creations, not to replicants such as Roy Batty and his followers, but to himself. That was the secret and the truth. And that's what the replicant technology was about, before it was stolen by the UN emigration program and handed over to the Tyrell Corporation. It had nothing to do with providing cheap slave labor for the immigrants in the far colonies. That was merely what the UN, with Eldon Tyrell's connivance, had twisted it into. Its real, true purpose was life itself. Eternal life.
You're joking. The fervor in the old man's voice had sent a creeping sensation across Iris's chilled skin. And I don't think it's very funny, she told herself. If it were only some kind of joke, it would be better than the nutcase religious tone that had seized upon Karsten's words. She didn't relish the thought of dealing with a religious fanatic, which was what he sounded like now. The fragile, white-haired figure had been transformed into some latter-day Savonarola. Right before her eyes. Savonarola.
Savonarola.
Savonarola. Savonarola Girolamo, Italian preacher and religious reformer. White-haired figure had been transformed into some latter-day Savonarola right before her eyes. Which means, thought Iris, I'll have a hard time with the rest of this bunch out here. The rest of his committee and its operatives were probably as crazy as he was. If she popped him, there was no telling how the ones up above on the sunlit desert surface would react. Not well was her best guess.
Immortality, said Karsten quietly, isn't something to joke about. Except when you don't think it's possible. Then everything is a joke, isn't it? Because everyone dies. Eventually, humans and replicants alike. It's just a matter of how soon. The batty replicant wouldn't have had to do anything to have his revenge on Eldon Tyrell except wait, even if that waiting had taken place after Batty was dead, his brief 4 years over. He'd have died with the comfort of knowing that someday, soon or late, his creator would join him in the grave, as all men do.
But somehow, that's what you're saying? The batty replicant knew that wasn't going to happen? Not with Tyrell? She studied the wrinkled face on the other side of the gun. Somehow, he wasn't going to die. Ever.
That's correct. Karsten gave a single nod. Because even though Eldon Tyrell and the UN immigration program had stolen and perverted the replicant technology, turned it into an assembly line for manufacturing slaves, its original purpose still existed. The replicant technology could be used for exactly that for which it had first been devised. But in this case, not for the sake of all humanity, but for one human being. Tyrell himself.
If, said Iris, it actually could work that way, which you haven't proved to me. She extended the gun a little farther, emphasizing her doubt. You haven't shown me anything except a corpse in a glass coffin. A corpse which has some kind of way slowed down heartbeat, and that looks like somebody I saw get murdered. She shook her head. I don't think much of the evidence so far.
That's because you haven't seen all of it.
Karsten stepped away from the open coffin, with a Tyrell-like figure inside it.
Let me show you something you might find more impressive.
He stopped beside the next coffin in the row, all of them mounted on the same knee-high trestles. With one hand, Karsten reached down and unlatched the glass lid and eased it back the way he had done with the first of them. He took a step away.
Take a look.
She had tracked him with the gun as he had gone through his showman routine. Now she stepped forward and glanced down into the newly opened coffin-like container. The twin of the other figure, the occupant of the first coffin Karsten had flung open, lay in this one, the exact same sleeping face. The grimly withered visage of Eldon Tyrell was gently touched by a few ice crystals that had been dislodged from the rim of the glass lid. Not much of a surprise, said Iris. Replicants come in multiples. That's what a production line is all about. She didn't need to check the slowed pulse of this one. She had spotted the tiny glacial tick in the vein at the side of the inert body's throat, indicating the same deep state of suspended animation the first one had been sunk into. How many duplicates of himself did Eldon Tyrell have his lab run off?
Enough for his purposes,
Karsten continued down the line, unlatching and tilting back the glass lids, revealing a dozen or so Tyrell replicants. Iris lost count as the process continued. He left the last one in the row still closed. Standing beside it, he looked at Iris.
It was a limited production run. We're pretty sure we've accounted for all of them. Our committee had its operatives right inside the Tyrell Corporation, most of them close to Eldon Tyrell himself, so we could keep an eye on what he was up to. When the Tyrell Corporation headquarters building was destroyed, we knew exactly what had to be extracted from the structurally secure chambers inside the ruins. We didn't want to take any chances on these particular items falling into the hands of any Tyrell loyalists, though in fact we have no idea of whether the Shadow Corporation elements had any idea of this part of Eldon Tyrell's plans. He was rather a secretive individual, but then he had a lot to conceal. No one else in the Tyrell Corporation knew what he did, other than the few lab operatives Eldon Tyrell needed in order to carry out his personal agenda. There was nobody except Tyrell himself who knew the real purpose of the replicant technology. And like some ancient Egyptian pharaoh murdering the architects of his tomb, once Tyrell had gotten the labor he needed out of those few lab operatives. Once he had gotten the replicants for which he had been the original templant, he simply eliminated them in as final a manner as possible. Let's just say that Eldon Tyrell saw no irony in attempting to achieve his own immortality at the price of other people's lives.
I still don't get it, even though her target stood a few meters farther away now. Iris kept the gun raised and leveled at his forehead. What's the point of running off a batch of physical duplicates of yourself? What would Tyrell have thought he was accomplishing with that? You take him out of these boxes and wake him up, then 4 years later, they're as dead as anybody else.
Ah, but you see, you're making the same erroneous assumption that so many others make about replicants.
Karsten spread his hands wide, indicating the row of coffins before him and their eerily similar contents.
And always have made since the original replicant technology was first stolen, and the uses suppressed for which that technology was created. You assume that a production run of replicants, no matter who was the original templant on which they were based, were meant to be created and animated simultaneously.
Well, yeah, of course. Iris made a slight gesture with her gun in her hand. What else? If you're cranking out slave labor or expendable troops for some suicide military operation, then you're naturally going to put as many as you can into the field all at the same time. There's no point in rationing them out, not if you're planning on winning whatever battle you're fighting, or getting as many emigrants as possible to sign up and ship out to the far colonies.
No point at all, agreed Karsten, as long as those are the uses to which you're putting the replicant technology. But as I said, the original purpose of the technology is entirely different. If you're using it for purposes of achieving immortality, then the replicants, even if created at the same time, are not animated simultaneously, but
sequentially, one after another, a chain of lives, as it were, amounting to one potentially endless life. Wait a minute. From over the raised gun, Iris skeptically regarded the old man. Let me see if I've got this right. What you're saying is that as one replicant wears out, one of these, let's say, she nodded toward the sleeping figures in the glass-lidded coffins, then the next Eldon Tyrell model in the line is animated, or woken up, or whatever you want to call it, and then the next one after that when its turn comes, all the way down the chain for however long you want to make it. But so what? Iris shook her head in exasperation. That's not immortality. If the original Eldon Tyrell is dead, he's still dead, whether there's some physical copy of him running around or not.
You're correct about that. The physical copy, in and of itself, is nothing. It is merely the container. The contents are what is important.
Karsten reached down and placed his hand on the brow of one of the figures, deep in its suspended animation.
It's what is in here that counts, that determines whether the original Eldon Tyrell would be alive or not. Of course, for that to be the case, we must dismiss another erroneous assumption about the nature of the replicant technology. Individuals such as yourself, Blade Runners, and others most concerned about replicants have always thought that the personalities and minds, even the souls of the creatures with which you dealt, were only fictional constructs, a matter of elaborately developed but still false memories and other gestalt-forming mental contents downloaded into the newly hatched replicants' cerebral cortices. Entire phony biographies written on blank slates, as it were. Life histories that seemed real to the replicants, even when they knew logically they were false. That none of the events and emotions they thought they remembered had in reality happened. Perhaps the cruelest deception of all, for no other reason, the replicants might have wished to have had their revenge on their creator. Know thyself is a vicious maxim, when to discover the truth is to discover that one's very nature is a lie.
That's the way it goes, Iris said. Everybody finds out they've been lied to, eventually.
True, said Karsten, and you and the rest of the Blade Runners were certainly lied to when you were informed that the replicants' mental contents, their minds and memories, were necessarily fiction. But they're not. The nature of the container, the physical form, doesn't dictate such falsehoods, any more than an empty glass dictates that water or wine be poured into it. The glass doesn't care, neither does the blank slate inside a newly created replicant, waiting for information to be inscribed upon it. Truth, to the degree that such exists in this universe, can be placed there just as readily as lies. And that, of course, is what the original purpose of the replicant technology was about. The immortality achieved by transcribing the actual mind and memories, and even the soul of an original human being into a newly created physical duplicate of that original.
Assuming it could be done, said Iris, why a physical duplicate? If I were Eldon Tyrell and I wanted my mind and memories and the rest transferred to a new body, I'd certainly want to trade up. Physically, that is. She nodded toward the withered visage in the coffin-like container closest to her. Surely the Tyrell Corporation could come up with something better looking than that.
Of course it could, but it couldn't be used for what you're talking about. The container might not dictate the contents, truth or a lie, but the contents do dictate the container into which they can be loaded. All Eldon Tyrell's mind and memories were based upon events that happened to a body just like these.
Karsten had taken his hand from the brow of the sleeping replicant. Now he gestured with it toward the rest of the figure in the glass-lidded coffin before him.
To put that mind and those memories, that dark soul, into some nobler, more heroic form would create a fatal discrepancy between the inner gestalt and its new physical manifestation. Believe me, it's been tried. I imagine Eldon Tyrell tried it himself at one time. The best result is total paralysis of the replicant that receives the mismatched download. The usual result is convulsions and death from an overload feedback in the connections between the spine and the major muscle groups.
Okay, scratch that then. A few ice crystals had drifted across Iris's hand and the black barrel of the gun. There they looked like minute stars in an inverted night sky. It still doesn't strike me as much of a process. What kind of immortality would you get out of this? It's not a chain. It's a loop. Just the same thing over and over again. The same damn Eldon Tyrell or anybody else, starting up again at the same place and living his same evil little life once more. But that's not immortality. It's a definition of hell.
So it would be, said Karsten, if that were all there had been to the original replicant technology. But there was more to it than that, much more. What my companies and the others had been trying to achieve was a refutation of the Newtonian law of thermodynamics that so harshly applies to information theory. The one that states that in every exchange some data loss inevitably creeps in.
Not if the information is digitized. Then it's a string of ones and zeros. You can't screw those up.
A typical mistake to worship the almighty bit.
Karsten's disdain was apparent in his pale eyes.
You are overlooking the fact that such information, however it is recorded outside of the human body, must still be transcribed back into an analog container, the raw, bloody pulp and gristle of the brain. To get beyond the loop you spoke of, to ensure that Eldon Tyrell or any other physical duplicated person wasn't simply going through the same dismal life over and over again to achieve an actual cumulative immortality, an ongoing life, then the basic gestalt information would have to be transcribed into and back out of an analog form that would, in fact, allow data errors to creep in. Worse, the process would create a cascading error effect. The errors would increase at a geometrical rate, rather than merely an arithmetical one. And of course, the farther back the information in the individual's biography, the more contaminated by error it would become every time it was transcribed into and out of the fallible, fleshy recording medium. only the most recently recorded information. The events that had happened to the most recent previous replicant in the sequential chain would be even relatively free of such transcription error. Everything else would be progressively lost to a deepening dementia and progressive loss of fundamental memory, leading to what my own company's psychiatric technicians termed gestalt collapse, the catastrophic implosion of all personality-based functioning, similar to a building crumbling in on itself due to the erosion of its foundation. When that happens, it doesn't matter how fresh and well preserved the top floor is. It goes along with the rest.
Congratulations, said Iris sourly. You've just proven that this whole immortality shtick could never work.
On the contrary, I have merely shown you what the problem is. What my company and the others were working on before the replicant technology was stolen from us. We knew very well what we were up against. We were attempting to defeat entropy itself, the inevitable principle of disorganization and loss of form that is a constant throughout the universe. The cruel part of having our work stolen from us is how close we had come to our goal.
How close is that?
Close enough so Eldon Tyrell was able to grasp the prize that had been inches from our fingers.
The seething resentment sparked brighter in Karsten's eyes.
Close enough for others, whether the UN Immigration Program or whoever has been working with the escaped replicants, to have realized he had managed to create the last missing piece of the puzzle. To have achieved true physical immortality using a sequential chain of replicants for which he had been the templant, without the entropic decay of the gestalt forming contents of his mind and memories. And having put the puzzle together at last, Eldon Tyrell had become too dangerous to live. Somebody, some agency, some force, some entity, either from outside or from within his own circle of confederates, even possibly from within the Tyrell Corporation itself, decided that rather than allowing him to live forever, it had become imperative he die immediately.
Karsten folded his arms across his chest.
And so it was arranged.
Iris could see the pieces of the other puzzle assembling themselves. Through the batty replicant.
Just so, replied Karsten. Somebody took the necessary steps from the far colonies all the way to Los Angeles to make sure that a murderous escaped replicant would be able to reach the Tyrell Corporation headquarters in LA, penetrate its defense systems with laughable ease, as well as be coached in the one cover story that would distract Eldon Tyrell from alerting the security agents, who would have been seconds away from coming to his aid. Instead of immortality, all that Eldon Tyrell wound up with was an endless future as a skull-crushed corpse, until such time as his bones were blown away by dust.
Now you've lost me again. Iris gestured with the gun she held aimed at the old man. What would it matter if the batty replicant killed Tyrell? You said he had already created the missing pieces to the puzzle. Some way of using a sequential chain of physical doubles of himself, replicants modeled after his templant, but with some kind of cumulative mind and personality which didn't decay and fall apart the way it otherwise would. And he had done so to the point that these other mysterious forces you're talking about, that had been somehow keeping track of what he was up to, would have known he had succeeded in achieving a method of immortality. That's why they sent the batty replicant to knock him off. But what's the problem with that? She made a dismissive flick to one side with the gun's dark barrel. Ice crystals shook from her numb hand and drifted down onto the face of the Eldon Tyrell figure in the glass-lidded coffin before her. It just means that the lifespan of his original physical body got terminated a little earlier, and maybe a little more uncomfortably than he had been expecting to happen. So what? He'd already had the next links in the sequential chain made up. They're lying right here in front of us. And if he had the magic key ready also, the way of getting the contents of his head into his replicant double without any information decay, then whatever Tyrell Corporation flunky he would have had standing by in case of emergencies like this, and of course he had one, paranoid guy, right? Then that flunky could have pulled the switch or whatever was involved and done the job, and Eldon Tyrell would have been up and running again, mean and ugly as ever. Why didn't that happen?
There's a lot of reasons it could have failed to happen. Karsten looked unimpressed with her arguments. Primarily due to Eldon Tyrell having been surrounded by far more conspirators and traitorous elements right inside his own corporation than he had any notion of. Whoever had been designated with the responsibility of, quote-unquote, throwing the switch, as you put it, could have been one of those traitors. Let's face it, Eldon Tyrell hardly had the kind of charisma that inspired universal loyalty among his employees. Any one of them might have preferred to see him as a corpse rather than as an animated replicant. One has to be careful about making enemies. They tend to multiply in the dark like insects. However, as much as something like that could have or should have happened to Eldon Tyrell, it is not in fact what occurred. His death, his true death, all chance of immortality gone, wasn't accomplished by the mere failure to throw the switch that would have put the transcription of his mind and memories into a waiting replicant receptacle. That would have been too easy, and not nearly final enough. For, of course, if the transcription that had been made of his mind and memories still existed, who could say the switch might not have been thrown later? Karsten shook his head. Better to be sure, Eldon Tyrell stayed dead. After all, it's what the batty replicant wanted, as well as the conspirators who arranged for his passage to L.A., and the only way to do that was to destroy the channel by which the transference of information from the dead Tyrell to the new replicant Tyrell was to have been made. And that's exactly what the batty replicant did. Iris regarded the old man sidelong once more. The creepily fervent tone had crept into his reedy voice again. Yeah? She was glad she had the gun hanging in her numbed hand between herself and Karsten. How'd he do that? You already saw how it was done, said Karsten. You saw the Blade Runner movie. And it wasn't just a movie, as your friend Vogel told you. It was in fact the actual taped record of what happened. So the way you saw Eldon Tyrell die in the film, the way you saw the batty replicant kill him, was the way Eldon Tyrell did indeed die. In reality, in the world as we know it. You understand that, don't you? Sure. Ice crystals sifted from Iris's close-cropped hair down the back of her neck. I've got the picture. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you're watching it right now on the screen of your memory. And you can, in fact, see in all its red detail the whole sequence of Batty's murder of Tyrell. Am I right?
Iris made no reply. The mere mention of the sequence had been enough to bring it up vividly inside her head, with no necessity for her to close her eyes to appreciate its somber beauties. She had felt no distaste the first time she had seen it, on the much larger and external screen of the private theater in what had been Tyrell's personal quarters in the ruins of the Tyrell Corporation building in L.A. Watching the sequence again in her memory produced no new questions. Only a death, Iris told herself, exactly like others she had seen, like others she herself had been responsible for. The only difference was the hands-on nature of this one, literally so. She watched in memory as Batty's hands settled on either side of his creator's age-creased head.
A very detailed shot, isn't it?
From down the row of glass-lidded coffins, Karsten's thin voice hectored at her.
When the makers of the film edited down the shots from the concealed video cameras, they went for the tight close-up to make sure that we could see exactly what happened. What the Batty replicant did to Tyrell other than simply kill him. Tell me, what did you see? What did happen then? What did the movie show?
The hands, Iris spoke slowly as the images unreeled in similar motion in her thoughts. And Tyrell's head.
The hands, yes. Very good.
Karsten leaned forward above the coffin closest to him, watching her as intently as might any bird of prey.
And the thumbs. Batty's thumbs.
His words seemed to be coming from infinitely far away, like the faint cry of some winged creature circling in a cloudless sky above. She could barely hear him, though she knew precisely what he had said to her. His thumbs. Iris could see them, the exact small motion pressing into Tyrell's face, and the blood that had welled up from beneath them. The eyes, Iris spoke quietly, the gun in her hand forgotten for a moment and drifting downward. Batty crushed his eyes.
Now you know, said Karsten.
His voice had turned gentle, almost kind in its tones, almost kind in its soft tones.
Or at least a bit more than you did previously. Look at me.
She turned her gaze away from the bloody images of memory and toward the old man in the ice-bound chamber.
You've got your hand, at last, upon the end of the thread that will unravel the rest of the secrets.
There was no fervor in Karsten's words now, only the simple authority of fact.
That's the trick, the switch to be pulled, as you put it. That's what is so important about them, and the way the Batty replicant killed Eldon Tyrell. Watch.
With the cold gun hanging at her side, Iris watched as Karsten reached down toward the face of the figure sleeping in the open coffin before him. With a gentle motion, he drew his fingertips across the eyelids of the Eldon Tyrell replicant. When he raised his hand from the figure's creased brow, there were 2 black holes where none had been before. Karsten, walking along the row of open coffin-like containers, reaching down and repeating the same simple action. As he passed, The faces all gazed upward with the same empty stare. When he came to the one in front of Iris, he drew his fingertips across its face as he had done with the others, then stepped back and regarded her in silence. She looked down at the empty eye sockets, emptier than any night sky could be. The hollowed-out sockets looked like twin wells into which one could fall and keep falling without ever hitting bottom. "The eyes," Karsten's words came from somewhere close by her. "They are the secret." Intercut. "Okay," said the director. He leaned forward, peering even more closely at the monitor screen. "She's onto it now." The camera operator scanned across the other screens before them, row after row of fragmented images from the icy subterranean chamber, the set beneath the desert surface. "God, that's ugly," he thought, wincing at the views of the suspended animation containers and what they held. He could have lived a long time without any need for seeing one eyeless Eldon Tyrell, rather than a whole platoon of them. But in some way, the view from the prime monitor, the one that the director was so intently studying, was even worse. The look on the female's face, as the camera operator had zoomed in on her, was that of someone on the verge of waking from their own troubled sleep, from bad dreams into... He didn't know. The director hadn't shown him the script. Everything had been live, real live improv. The camera operator working the controls with virtually no respite for hours on end. But it's almost over, he told himself. Even for a job like this, with so much left so irritatingly mysterious, a certain instinct for pacing had kicked in. He could tell when the end was coming. Whether the female they had been tracking, the one whose face filled the monitor screen, would be as relieved was another matter. "Stay on her," instructed the director, swiveling his chair away from the bank of glowing images. "We're going in for the kill now." From the corner of his eye, the camera operator watched as the director reached for the tight cell phone sitting on the top shelf of the wheeled equipment cart. He had no idea what the director meant by that, but it didn't sound good to him. The director had his wide, overfleshed back to him, so he couldn't hear what was being said into the phone. What new instructions were being given and to whom? "Not your department," the camera operator told himself. "All you have to do is watch." He looked back toward the monitor screen. The female's eyes seemed to gaze right back into his own, as though waiting for him to speak, to warn her somehow.